So, I watched the new Conjuring movie, and I'd like to be clear that I watched it on my own accord. No one made me do it. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're talking about a brand new release, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it. And make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. This once again stars Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga as Ed and Lorraine Warren. One of the most sensational cases from their files, this film starts with a fight for the soul of a young boy, then takes this beyond anything they'd ever seen before to mark the first time in US history that a murder suspect would claim demonic possession as a defense. The Conjuring movies are two of my favorite horror movies in the last decade or so. The first one in particular I find to be in the top 5 of the best ones from the 2010s. And the second one I liked about a hair less. I still found it to be great. I had a few more issues with it than I did the first, but overall I really enjoyed them both. And because of how much I liked those first two films, this easily made it to my most anticipated movies of the year list. But I did have one hesitation, and it's the fact there's one key element from those first two films that's unfortunately missing here, and that's James Wan. He's still on as a producer, and he came up with the story, but he had no hand in the actual screenplay, which this time is written solely by David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick, who co-wrote the first two films with Wan. And in the director's chair this time is Michael Chaves, who also directed the spin-off film The Curse of La Llorona. Now, I know a lot of people really didn't care for that movie, but I found it to be serviceable. But of course, it was nowhere near on the same level as the main series. And unfortunately, this also doesn't quite reach the same heights as those first two films. I'd say it's better than La Llorona, but it's nothing remotely close to what I call a horror classic. While Chaves does a commendable job here, you can feel the loss of Wan all throughout this. Wan is probably one of my favorite horror directors currently working, and the work he did on those first two movies gave them a spine-tingling feel that made them nothing short of frightening. Chaves, unfortunately, with this only being his second film behind the camera, still has a ways to go. There are times he's able to evoke that sense of dread, but his style feels kind of flat and staticky, and he can't keep the film consistently engaging. Now, the film starts off fine. In fact, the opening scene is actually the best part of the whole film, with Ed and Lorraine brought in to perform an exorcism on a young boy named David, and between the imagery, the score, and the blood-curdling sound effects, it's a brilliantly done scene, and it's the only time this movie comes even close to matching the excellence on display in those first two films. But once we get past that moment, however, things slow down. This is a much more meticulously paced film. Whereas the first two were straight-up haunted house movies, this crosses those elements with an investigative mystery, as this gets into a court case, which is based on a real-life case that involved a young man claiming he was possessed by the devil, and it was because of that he committed a murder. And this leads the Warrens to travel to Massachusetts to look into an incident from years ago that was similar to the one they're trying to deal with in Connecticut. But when it's focused on this investigation, that's where the film loses me a bit. Not that I necessarily have an issue with the film attempting to branch out and do something different for the sake of keeping things fresh, but it's not as if we're scaling back on the horror elements to dive into some juicy character drama. These moments are instead very exposition heavy, and sometimes they feel like they can go on with some long stretches of characters just explaining things to us, and it requires us to pay close attention, as the main goal is to link an old murder case to the one that the Warrens are currently dealing with, so we get a lot of backstory here. And they do try to do some things to make it interesting, like there's a point where Lorraine has a vision that allows her to recreate the murder scene and understand what happened. There's also a running storyline where Ed suffers a heart attack due to the events of the opening scene, and he can't exert as much energy, which also becomes a source of tension as they get more heavily involved with the case. And thankfully, things like that definitely keep this movie afloat, especially due to Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's performances. They are always a welcome sight. They are their usual charismatic selves, once again having excellent chemistry with one another, and because of how involved Ed and Lorraine get, they inject this sometimes underwhelming story with a lot of emotion. Now, there are times the film would be creepy, though I'd say it wouldn't be until much later on. There are little things early in the film here and there, like the aforementioned vision Lorraine has worked well enough for me, but that overall unsettling feel that was present in those first two films isn't as consistent here, instead opting more for the exposition-heavy moments I mentioned earlier, with some creepier elements sprinkled in there, along with some unnecessary jump scares, which I didn't care for. I'd say the final act is where it once again gets somewhat closer to being like The Conjuring that we all know and love, where it goes all in on its demonic and ghostly elements, even if it doesn't quite hit the heights as those first two movies, or even the opening scene of this, but it ends on a good enough note. And for that, I'd say I enjoyed this movie overall. I just wouldn't say that I loved it. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It is fine. Unfortunately, the lack of James Wan's involvement is felt, with a mystery-oriented, exposition-heavy story at the forefront instead of a haunted house film this time. There are times it drags, but there are also enough creepy moments in here that I found it to be engaging. It starts off with a bang and ends on an eerie enough note, and has some well-done moments of dread sprinkled in. But it's mainly enjoyable due to Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, both of whom are as charismatic as ever, and inject some much-needed emotion into a hit-and-miss story. So, while I didn't love this the way I did the first two movies, I think the good just outweighs the bad to make this a fairly enjoyable, if inconsistent time. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It gets a 6.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see The Conjuring 3, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like this as much as the first two movies? Do you want to see more of these Conjuring films be made? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.